He inherited an abandoned factory for free, dismissed by everyone as worthless junk. But when this struggling single father finally cracked open the sealed vault buried 3 floors below ground, what he found inside was worth $250 million and held a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about his family. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The alarm clock screamed at 4:45 a.m., the same as it did every weekday morning. Marcus Holland slammed his calloused hand down on the snooze button, giving himself exactly 9 more minutes before the real day began. 9 minutes to pretend he wasn't 32 years old and already feeling 50. 9 minutes to forget about the stack of overdue bills on the kitchen counter, the check engine light in his truck that he couldn't afford to fix, and the fact that Riley's school shoes were developing holes he'd been patching with duct tape and prayer. The apartment was dark and cold. The landlord kept promising to fix the heating, but promises didn't keep an 8-year-old warm at night. Marcus had been running a space heater in Riley's room, watching the electric bill climb higher each month, doing the math in his head and coming up short every single time. He dragged himself out of bed, his lower back protesting with that familiar ache that came from spending 10 hours a day hunched under car hoods. The bathroom mirror showed a man who looked older than his years, dark circles under brown eyes, stubble he was too tired to shave, hair that needed cutting but that cost money he didn't have. By 5:15, Marcus had showered in lukewarm water because the hot water heater was dying, dressed in his work coveralls that still smelled like motor oil no matter how many times he washed them, and started the coffee maker. The machine sputtered and hissed, producing something that was technically coffee but tasted more like regret. He checked on Riley before leaving. She was curled up under 3 blankets, her stuffed elephant clutched tight against her chest. Her face in sleep was peaceful, innocent, unaware of how hard her father worked just to keep that peace intact. Marcus adjusted the blankets around her shoulders, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered, "Love you, baby girl." She didn't wake up. She never did. By the time Riley opened her eyes at 7, Marcus would already be 2 hours into his shift at Jensen's Auto Repair, his hands black with grease, his mind calculating how many oil changes he needed to complete to make rent. The shop was on the poor side of town, servicing cars that were held together more by hope than mechanics. Marcus was good at his job, better than good actually. He could diagnose problems other mechanics missed, coax life out of engines that should have died years ago, and work miracles with outdated parts and limited budgets. But being good didn't pay well when your customers were as broke as you were. "Morning, Marcus," Jensen called out when Marcus arrived. The old man was already there, as he always was, nursing coffee that was somehow worse than Marcus's home brew. "Got 6 cars lined up already. Gonna be a long one." "Every day's a long one," Marcus replied, grabbing his tool belt. He worked through the morning in a blur of brake pads, transmission fluid, and rusted bolts that refused to budge. His mind operated on autopilot, hands moving with muscle memory, while his thoughts drifted to Riley. Her school had sent home another notice about the field trip she couldn't afford to go on. The other kids would visit the science museum while Riley sat in another classroom, coloring, pretending she didn't care. Marcus had tried to talk to her about it last night. "It's okay, Dad," she'd said, not meeting his eyes. "Museums are probably boring anyway." But he'd seen her looking at the permission slip, her small fingers tracing the description of the planetarium show, the interactive exhibits, the dinosaur bones. She wanted to go. Of course she wanted to go. She was 8 years old and curious about everything, and he couldn't give it to her. The injustice of it burned in his chest as he torqued down lug nuts on a 2003 Civic. He worked harder, stayed longer, picked up every overtime shift available. But the math never changed. There was always more month than money. At lunch, Marcus sat in the break room eating a peanut butter sandwich, the same thing he'd eaten for lunch every day for the past 6 months, when Jensen appeared in the doorway. "Marcus, you got a phone call." Guy says it's important, something about your family. Marcus frowned. He didn't have much family left. His parents were gone. Dad to a heart attack 7 years ago, Mom to cancer 2 years after that. He had a sister in Oregon they talked to maybe twice a year. And there was Uncle Vincent, his father's younger brother, but Marcus hadn't heard from him in over a decade. "Hello?" Marcus said, picking up the shop phone. "Mr. Marcus Holland?" The voice was formal, professional. "Yes, that's me." "This is Gerald Patterson from Patterson & Sons Legal Services. I'm calling regarding the estate of Vincent Holland. I understand he was your uncle." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Was? I'm very sorry to inform you that Vincent passed away 2 weeks ago. He had listed you as his sole beneficiary, and we need to discuss his estate. Would you be able to come to our office this week?" The rest of the conversation blurred. Marcus heard words like inheritance and property and legal documents, but his mind couldn't process them. Uncle Vincent was dead. The strange, quiet man who'd disappeared from family gatherings decades ago, who'd sent exactly one Christmas card in Marcus's entire memory, who'd been more myth than relative, gone. And apparently, he'd left Marcus something. That evening, Marcus picked Riley up from the after-school program. She bounced into the truck, backpack nearly as big as she was, chattering about her day. And then Emma said that her dad is taking her to Disney World, and I said that's cool, and then she asked when we're going on vacation, and I said we went to the park that one time, remember? With the ducks? And she said that's not really a vacation, but I said it was to me because we had ice cream and, "Dad, are you listening?" Marcus blinked, realizing he'd been staring at nothing. "Sorry, baby, I'm listening. The park with the ducks." Riley studied him with those 2 observant 8-year-old eyes. "Are you sad?" "No, honey, just tired. And I got some news today. Remember I told you about Uncle Vincent? The one you never talked to?" "Never talked to, yeah. Well, he passed away, sweetie, and his lawyer called. Apparently, Uncle Vincent left us something." Riley's eyes went wide. "Like a treasure?" Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Probably not a treasure. More like, I don't know. We'll find out together, okay? We have to go to a lawyer's office tomorrow." "Can I miss school?" "Nice try." After school. The next afternoon, Marcus and Riley sat in the waiting room of Patterson & Sons Legal Services. The office smelled like old books and furniture polish. Riley swung her legs from the chair, her feet not quite reaching the floor, while Marcus filled out paperwork with hands that left small grease stains on the clean white pages. Attorney Gerald Patterson was exactly what Marcus expected. A thin man in his 60s wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus made in a month, with wire-rimmed glasses and a handshake that was firm but impersonal. "Mr. Holland, thank you for coming. And this must be Riley?" Riley nodded shyly, pressing closer to Marcus's side. They settled in Patterson's conference room, a space with dark wood paneling and paintings of hunting dogs that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. Patterson opened a file folder thick with documents. "I'll be direct, Mr. Holland. Your uncle Vincent Holland passed away on March 14th of a heart attack. He was 76 years old. He had no spouse, no children, and according to his will, you are his sole living relative and beneficiary." Marcus shifted in his seat. "I barely knew him. We maybe met 3 times my entire life." He was aware of that. In fact, he addressed it directly in his will. Patterson pulled out a document. "You're inheriting his primary asset, which is a property known as the Holland Manufacturing Facility." Patterson slid a photograph across the table. Marcus picked it up, and his heart sank. The building in the photo was massive, 5 stories of red brick and iron, with smokestacks jutting into a gray sky. But it was clearly abandoned. Windows were broken or boarded up. Weeds grew through cracks in the vast parking lot. Rust stained the walls like old blood. It looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie, a monument to dead industry and forgotten dreams. "That's a factory," Marcus said flatly. Correct. Built in 1947, it produced industrial equipment until it shut down in 1983. Your uncle purchased the property in 1991 for a remarkably low price and lived there until his death. Riley leaned over to look at the photo. It's huge, Daddy. It's a disaster, Marcus muttered. He looked at Patterson. How much are the property taxes on something like that? All current and paid through the end of this year. Your uncle was very diligent about taxes, utilities, and basic maintenance. Utilities? Someone's been paying to keep the lights on in an abandoned factory? Patterson nodded. There's a small apartment on the 3rd floor where your uncle lived. Very modest from what I understand. The rest of the building has been essentially unused for decades. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Can I sell it? Patterson's expression became carefully neutral. You're welcome to try. However, I should inform you that the property has been listed 3 times in the past 30 years with no buyers. The industrial district where it's located is economically depressed. The building requires extensive repairs and renovations. And there are local concerns about the property. What kind of concerns? Your uncle was a very private man. Some people in the community believed he was involved in activities that were less than legal. Others simply thought he was eccentric. The property has developed something of a reputation. You're saying people think it's haunted or something? Patterson adjusted his glasses. I'm saying the property has been difficult to sell, regardless of price. Marcus looked at the photograph again, at the crumbling factory that was apparently now his problem. So I'm inheriting a worthless building that no one wants in a part of town that's dying. That's one way to look at it, Patterson said. Or you could view it as owning a significant piece of real estate free and clear. The choice of what to do with it is entirely yours. Patterson reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Marcus's name was written across the front in shaky handwriting. Your uncle left this for you. He was very specific that it should be given to you in person after you'd been informed of the inheritance. Marcus took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. Riley watched as he carefully opened it, unfolding a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was difficult to read, shaky and cramped, but Marcus made it out. Marcus, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably angry. I don't blame you. We never knew each other, and that's my fault. I made choices that kept me separate from the family, from the world, really. I had my reasons. The factory is yours now. I know it looks like a burden, maybe it is, but I'm asking you, begging you, to go there before you make any decisions about selling or abandoning it. Go to the basement, the 3rd sublevel, east corner. Behind the boiler marked B7, you'll find something. A door. It's sealed, but I've left it so you can open it. The combination is your birthday, 0815. What's inside belongs to you now. What you do with it is your choice. But please, Marcus, go see it first. Understand what I protected all these years. Understand why I disappeared. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I wasn't there for anyone, but maybe this can make up for some of that. Your uncle, Vincent. Marcus read the letter twice, Riley peering over his arm to see. When he looked up, Patterson was watching him with curious eyes. Did you read this? Marcus asked. No, it was sealed. He wants me to go to the basement of that factory, says there's something hidden there. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. Did he specify what? No, just that there's a door behind a boiler and I need to see what's inside before I decide anything. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Then Riley tugged on Marcus's sleeve. We should go look, Dad. It's like a mystery. Marcus looked at his daughter's eager face, then back at the photograph of the crumbling factory, then at his uncle's shaky handwriting. Everything in his practical mind screamed that this was a waste of time. He should sign whatever papers were necessary to transfer ownership, list the property for whatever he could get, and move on with his life. He didn't have time for mysteries or dead uncles or sealed doors in abandoned basements, but something else, something deeper, something that sounded suspiciously like hope, whispered that maybe, just maybe, Vincent Holland had left him more than a building that no one wanted. "Okay," Marcus heard himself say. "We'll go look." Patterson handed him a set of keys, heavy and old-fashioned. "The property is yours now. You're welcome to access it whenever you'd like. If you need anything, contractors, appraisers, real estate agents, my office can provide referrals." Marcus pocketed the keys, the letter, and the photograph. As he and Riley left the office, stepping back into the late afternoon sunlight, Riley grabbed his hand. "Do you think Uncle Vincent left us a treasure, Dad, like pirates?" Marcus looked down at her hopeful face. "I don't know, baby, but I guess we're about to find out." The drive to the factory took them through neighborhoods that got progressively more forgotten. They passed closed storefronts with faded signs, empty lots where buildings had been torn down and never replaced, and streets where more houses were abandoned than occupied. The industrial district was a graveyard of American manufacturing, full of buildings that had once employed thousands and now employed only ghosts and memories. Riley pressed her face against the truck window, taking it all in. "Why did all these places close, Dad?" "Jobs went away, honey. Factories moved to other countries where it was cheaper. People couldn't afford to stay. It happens." "That's sad." "Yeah, it really is." The Holland manufacturing facility sat at the end of a dead-end street, isolated from even the other abandoned buildings. As Marcus pulled into the cracked parking lot, the full scale of the place became apparent. It was enormous, easily taking up an entire city block. The red brick walls rose 5 stories high, dotted with rows of windows that reflected the setting sun like dead eyes. Smokestacks stretched even higher, dark silhouettes against the orange sky. Marcus cut the engine, and for a moment they just sat there, staring at the building. "It looks like a castle," Riley whispered. "A scary castle." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "It kind of does." He checked his phone. They had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. Not much time to explore a building this size, but enough to find the basement and see what Vincent had been so insistent about. "Okay, ground rules," Marcus said, turning to Riley. "You stay with me at all times. You don't wander off. You don't touch anything that looks dangerous. And if I say we're leaving immediately. Deal?" Riley nodded seriously. "Deal." They approached the front entrance together, Marcus fumbling with the keys until he found the one that fit the heavy padlock securing the main doors. The lock opened with a metallic groan that echoed across the empty parking lot, loud in the silence. The chain rattled as Marcus pulled it free. For a moment he hesitated, his hand on the door handle. Every instinct told him this was a bad idea. Taking his 8-year-old daughter into an abandoned building as the sun was setting, this was how horror movies started. But Riley looked up at him with complete trust, and Marcus realized he was doing this as much for her as for himself. Maybe more. If there was even the slightest chance that Vincent had left them something valuable, something that could change their lives, he had to look. He pulled the door open. The smell hit them first. Decades of dust, rust, old paper, and stale air that hadn't moved in who knew how long. Marcus pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The entrance lobby was vast, with ceilings at least 20 feet high. A reception desk sat to one side, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. Old chairs lined the walls, still waiting for workers who would never return. Bulletin boards still held yellowed notices from 1983, safety reminders, shift schedules, a flyer for a Christmas party that never happened. "It's like everyone just left one day and never came back," Riley said softly, her voice echoing in the space. "That's probably exactly what happened," Marcus replied. "When factories closed, they usually closed fast. One day you have a job, the next day you don't." They moved deeper into the building, Marcus's phone light revealing more frozen moments in time. A calendar stuck on November 1983, a jacket still hanging on a hook, a coffee mug on a desk with the dried remnants of what might have been the last cup of coffee ever brewed here. The main corridor stretched ahead of them, doors branching off on both sides. Marcus checked his uncle's letter again, though he'd already memorized it. Third sublevel, east corner, behind boiler B7. They needed to find the stairs down. It took 15 minutes of searching before Marcus found them, hidden behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. The door hung crooked on broken hinges, opening to reveal a stairwell that descended into darkness. Marcus shined his light down. The beam disappeared into black. "Maybe this is far enough," Riley said, her earlier excitement fading. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow with better lights." Marcus was about to agree when he noticed something. The stairs, despite the decay everywhere else, looked recently used. The dust on the steps showed disturbance patterns, footprints, not fresh, but not decades old either. Someone had been going up and down these stairs regularly. Uncle Vincent, Marcus realized. He'd been living here, which meant he must have maintained at least some of the building. "We'll be quick," Marcus said. "Just down to the third sublevel, check behind that boiler, and then we're out. 30 minutes, tops." They descended carefully, Marcus going first and testing each step before letting Riley follow. The stairwell was concrete and steel, echoing with every footfall. Emergency lights that probably hadn't worked in decades lined the walls, useless shells. The first sublevel opened onto what must have been storage, empty shelves stretching into darkness, wooden pallets rotting into abstract shapes. The air smelled worse here, mustier, heavier. The second sublevel held machinery, massive industrial equipment frozen mid-operation, conveyor belts, hydraulic presses, assembly stations, all of it coated in dust and rust, monuments to labor that no longer existed. The third sublevel was different. The moment they stepped off the stairs, Marcus felt it. The air was colder here, noticeably so. Their breath came out in small clouds, and unlike the chaos above, this level felt organized, maintained. The concrete walls were bare but clean. The floor, while dusty, showed regular foot traffic. And most tellingly, there was electrical lighting. Marcus found a switch near the stairwell and flipped it. To his surprise, fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, buzzing softly as they illuminated the space. Uncle Vincent was definitely down here, Marcus said. They followed the corridor east, Riley now holding tight to Marcus's hand. The sublevel seemed to go on forever, a maze of corridors and rooms. They passed what looked like old storage areas, maintenance closets, and rooms full of equipment Marcus couldn't identify. Finally, they reached the east corner. A sign on the wall read Boiler Room. The door was unlocked. Inside, 7 massive boilers lined the far wall, each one a cylindrical giant that must have once provided heat for the entire facility. They were labeled with stenciled numbers, B1 through B7. Boiler B7 sat at the end, just as Vincent's letter had specified. Marcus approached it slowly, shining his light across every surface. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Just a rust-stained, paint-peeling industrial boiler that hadn't operated in 4 decades. Then Riley pointed. "Dad, look at the wall behind it!" Marcus squeezed between the boiler and the wall, flashlight revealing what Riley had spotted. There was a seam in the concrete, barely visible, but definitely there. A rectangular outline approximately 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide. A door hidden in plain sight. Marcus ran his fingers along the seam, feeling for any kind of handle or mechanism. Nothing on the surface. But then his hand found it, a small panel at waist height, painted the same gray as the surrounding concrete. He pressed it, and it clicked open, revealing a numeric keypad. "The combination is your birthday, 0815. Marcus's hands trembled as he entered the numbers. 0815. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Marcus felt his stomach sink, thinking maybe the batteries had died, or the electronics had failed, or Vincent had been wrong about the code. Then he heard it. A deep mechanical sound, like gears engaging after decades of silence. The sound of locks disengaging, multiple locks, heavy and industrial. Metal sliding against metal somewhere deep in the wall. The door shifted inward, moving an inch, then another inch. Marcus grabbed the edge and pulled. The door was extraordinarily heavy, reinforced with steel, but it moved smoothly on well-maintained hinges. Someone had kept this mechanism working, oiled, functional. Beyond the door was darkness, but not empty darkness. Marcus's flashlight beam caught reflections. Glass, metal, something organized. "Stay here for just a second," Marcus told Riley. "No way, Dad. We're doing this together." Marcus looked at his daughter's determined face and couldn't argue. "Okay, together." They stepped through the door. Marcus swept his flashlight around the space, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The room was enormous, at least 30 feet by 40 feet, with a 12-foot ceiling. But that wasn't what made his breath catch. The walls were lined with display cases, dozens of them, glass-fronted, sealed, each one illuminated by soft LED lights that flickered on as they entered, triggered by motion sensors. The lights revealed an impossible sight. Inside the cases were items Marcus's brain struggled to process. Antique objects, historical artifacts, vintage technology, all of it organized, labeled, preserved with museum-quality care. Marcus moved to the nearest case like he was in a dream. Inside sat a collection of vintage watches, each one resting on a velvet cushion. Small brass plaques identified them with careful script. Patek Philippe Minute Repeater, 1891. Breguet Marie Antoinette, Original Commission Drawings, 1783. Vacheron Constantin, 1755. "Dad," Riley breathed, "are those real?" Marcus moved to the next case. Vintage cameras, Leica prototypes, early Kodaks, rare Graflex models. Another case held scientific instruments, antique microscopes, telescopes, navigation equipment. Then early computers, rare vinyl records, military medals spanning back to the Civil War. Every case was meticulously organized. Every item was preserved in pristine condition, and every single piece had detailed documentation, authentication certificates, provenance records, historical context. In the center of the room sat a large wooden desk, its surface covered with leather-bound journals. Marcus approached it with shaking hands, opening the first journal he touched. Inside was Vincent's handwriting, neat and careful, documenting each item in the collection. Purchase date, acquisition cost, historical significance, authentication process, current estimated value. Marcus flipped through page after page, his mind reeling. The numbers kept climbing. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. He found a recent entry, dated just 6 months before Vincent's death. At the bottom of the page, his uncle had written a summary. Total collection, 847 items. Total appraised value as of September, $247 million. $247 million. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard in the desk chair, the journal still open in his lap. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. His weird, reclusive uncle couldn't have accumulated a collection worth $250 million. But here it was, surrounding him on all sides, proof undeniable. "Dad?" Riley's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Dad, are you okay?" Marcus looked up at his 8-year-old daughter, standing in an underground vault worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Her face illuminated by the soft glow of display cases filled with treasures from throughout human history. "I don't know, baby," Marcus said honestly, his voice barely a whisper. "I really don't know." He stood on shaking legs and walked to another case, then another, each one revealing more impossibilities. Original Edison patents, Civil War correspondence, a prototype computer that shouldn't still exist, artwork that belonged in the Smithsonian, historical documents signed by names from textbooks. Every item was real. Every item was authenticated. Every item was worth more than Marcus made in a year, in 5 years, in a lifetime. Vincent Holland had spent 50 years building this collection in absolute secrecy, 3 levels underground in an abandoned factory, and now, impossibly, inexplicably, it belonged to Marcus. The struggling mechanic who could barely pay rent. The single father who patched his daughter's shoes with duct tape. The man who ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day because he couldn't afford anything else. That man now owned a collection worth $247 million. Marcus looked at Riley, then at the journals, then at the cases full of treasures, then back at Riley. "What are we going to do, Dad?" she asked. And for the first time in 3 years, since Sarah died, since money got tight, since every day became a battle just to survive, Marcus Holland didn't have an answer. All he knew was that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend. And somewhere, in whatever place eccentric uncles go after they die, Vincent Holland was probably watching, waiting to see what Marcus would do with the secret he'd protected for half a century. The vault hummed softly around them, climate-controlled and preserved, a treasure trove that shouldn't exist but did. And Marcus stood at the center of it, holding his daughter's hand, staring at an inheritance that was worth more than money. It was responsibility. It was choice. It was the weight of history and the burden of legacy and the terrifying possibility of hope. The factory above them was dark and forgotten. But 3 levels below, in a sealed room that had waited decades to be opened, the past glowed softly in climate-controlled cases, patient and priceless, waiting to see what the future would do with it. Marcus didn't sleep that night. How could he? After locking the vault and sealing the factory, after driving Riley home in silence broken only by her whispered questions he couldn't answer, after tucking her into bed and watching her finally drift off with her stuffed elephant clutched tight, after all of that, sleep was impossible. He sat at their tiny kitchen table in the apartment that suddenly felt even smaller, surrounded by the 3 journals he'd taken from the vault. He knew he probably shouldn't have removed anything, but he needed to understand, needed to know who Vincent Holland really was and why he'd spent half a century building something nobody knew existed. The earliest journal dated back to 1972, when Vincent would have been just 24 years old. The handwriting was different then, younger, more energetic, full of loops and flourishes that would later disappear into the cramped, shaky script of an old man. The first entry was dated March 15, 1972. "Today I bought something I probably shouldn't have." Mrs. Henderson was selling her late husband's effects at an estate sale. Most of it was junk. Old clothes, broken furniture, the accumulated debris of a life. But in a cardboard box marked "Military," I found 7 medals from the Great War, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts, a Distinguished Service Cross. The auctioneer was selling them for $200. Nobody else bid. I don't know why I did. When I held that Bronze Star, I felt something. The weight of it. The man who earned this was brave. He mattered. He did something that meant something. And here his medals were, about to be scattered to strangers who'd probably melt them down for the metal. I brought them home, cleaned them, researched each one, found out Private First Class Robert Henderson served in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, wounded twice, saved 3 men from a German machine gun nest, came home to Indiana, worked at a grain elevator for 40 years, raised 5 kids, died at 68, and his widow sold his medals for grocery money. Someone should protect these things. Someone should remember. Marcus felt his throat tighten. That was how it started. Not with greed or ambition, but with a young man who thought someone should remember. He flipped through more entries, watching Vincent's hobby slowly become an obsession. The next acquisition was a collection of antique pocket watches from a pawn shop. Then a set of vintage cameras at a garage sale. then scientific instruments from a university liquidation. Vincent worked at the Holland manufacturing facility during these years. The factory was still operational then, still employing hundreds of workers. He worked the day shift as a maintenance technician, lived in a modest apartment, and spent every spare hour hunting through estate sales, auctions, antique shops, and anywhere else pieces of history were being discarded. An entry from 1976 showed the evolution. I've been studying authentication techniques, reading books on provenance research, learning how to spot fakes and forgeries. The more I learn, the more I realize how much valuable history is being lost or destroyed every single day. Things that should be in museums end up in landfills. Documents that scholars would treasure get thrown away by families who don't understand their value. I can't save everything, but I can save some things. I'm getting better at it too. Found a collection of Edison cylinder recordings at a farmhouse clearance last week. The family thought they were worthless. I knew what they were the moment I saw them. Paid $300 for the whole lot. They're worth at least $10,000, maybe more. But I'm not selling them. I'm keeping them safe. The years rolled past in journal entries. Vincent never married, never had children. His entire social circle seemed to consist of other collectors, auction house employees, and antique dealers. He lived cheaply, saved aggressively, and poured every dollar he could spare into acquiring pieces of history. Then Marcus found the entry that explained everything. It was dated November 3rd, 1983. The factory closed today. They announced it last week, but today was the last shift. 40 years of operation gone. Over 300 people lost their jobs. I watched grown men cry. Families destroyed. The whole town is going to die without this place. But I kept thinking about something else. When they shut down production, they left everything. Tools still on workbenches, parts half-assembled, paperwork scattered everywhere. In 50 years, someone's going to want to know what American manufacturing looked like. They're going to want to understand how these places worked, what they built, why they mattered, and there won't be anything left to show them. That's when I understood what I need to do. This isn't just about collecting anymore, it's about preservation. It's about making sure that when everything is gone, there's still proof that we were here, that we made things, that we mattered. 8 years later, Vincent bought the entire factory building for almost nothing. The industrial district was already dying. Nobody wanted a massive, obsolete structure that cost a fortune to maintain. But Vincent did. Marcus found detailed plans in the next journal, architectural drawings, contractor estimates, material lists. Vincent had spent 3 years converting the third sublevel into a climate-controlled vault. Professional grade, museum quality. He'd hired contractors from 3 states away, paid them well to keep quiet, and built a fortress for his collection. An entry from 1995 made Marcus's hands shake. The vault is complete. Triple-sealed doors, industrial dehumidification, temperature control accurate to 1 degree. Security systems. Everything a museum would have, I have better, because museums have bureaucrats and budget cuts and politics. I don't answer to anyone. I've moved the entire collection down there, 837 items so far. Current estimated value, $42 million. But that's not why I did this. I did it because someone has to. Someone has to protect these things from a world that throws away history like it's garbage. Marcus flipped ahead, watching the numbers climb. 50 million, 75 million, 100 million. The collection grew exponentially as Vincent's expertise deepened and his network expanded. He became known in certain circles as a serious buyer, someone who paid fair prices and asked no questions. But there was a cost. An entry from 2003 was heartbreaking. My brother died today. James. Heart attack at 61. I got the call from his wife. The funeral is Saturday. I'm not going. I know what they'd say, what they'd think. Vincent finally shows up after 20 years, probably looking for money. I can't face that. Can't explain why I disappeared. How could I tell them I chose objects over people, that I missed birthdays and holidays and family dinners because I was at auctions or researching provenance or organizing the collection? They wouldn't understand. Nobody would. But this work matters. It has to matter. Because if it doesn't, then what have I been doing with my life? Marcus set the journal down, his vision blurred. That funeral was for his father. Vincent hadn't even come to say goodbye to his own brother because he was too ashamed to face the family he'd abandoned. The later journals became more reflective, less about acquisitions and more about meaning. Vincent questioned himself constantly. Why was he doing this? Who was it for? What was the point of preserving history if nobody knew it existed? Then Marcus found photographs. They were tucked in the back of the most recent journal, printed on photo paper, dated just a year ago. The first photo showed Vincent, an old man with silver hair and tired eyes, standing in the vault surrounded by his life's work. He looked small against the displays, diminished by the weight of what he'd built. The second photo showed a wall Marcus hadn't noticed in the vault. It was covered with family pictures. Marcus's father as a young man, Marcus's mother, Marcus himself at various ages, school photos, Little League, high school graduation, and Riley. Baby pictures, kindergarten, recent photos that Vincent must have gotten somehow. Vincent had been watching, following their lives from a distance, unable or unwilling to be part of the family but not quite able to let go completely. The third photo was of a handwritten letter, photographed as if Vincent wanted to preserve it. Marcus recognized his own handwriting immediately. It was a Christmas card from years ago, back when Marcus was maybe 13, the kind of generic card kids are forced to write to relatives they barely know. Dear Uncle Vincent, thank you for the birthday card. School is good. I'm playing baseball. Hope you're doing well. Marcus. That was it. Maybe 50 words total, polite but meaningless. And Vincent had kept it, photographed it, preserved it like it was precious. The final journal entry was dated just 2 months before Vincent's death. I'm 76 years old. The doctors say my heart is failing. I have 6 months, maybe a year. I've spent 50 years building this collection, and I'm going to die alone in a factory surrounded by things that outlived the people who made them. I keep thinking about Marcus, James's boy. I've never really known him, but I've watched from afar. Saw that he married young. Saw that his wife passed away. Cancer, I think. Saw that he's raising a daughter alone, working as a mechanic, struggling like James struggled, like our father struggled. The Holland men have always been workers, always been fighters, always been too proud to ask for help even when they're drowning. I want to give Marcus a choice I never had. The collection is worth nearly $250 million now. He could sell it all, be set for life, give his daughter everything I never gave anyone. That would be fine. That would be good. He deserves that. But maybe, and this is selfish, I know, maybe he'll see what I saw. That these things matter. That history is worth protecting. That someone needs to stand between the past and oblivion. I don't know which choice he'll make, but at least he'll have a choice. That's more than most people get. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything I wasn't, for every moment I chose silence over family, for being the strange uncle nobody talked about. But this collection, it's the best of me, the only good thing I managed to do with my life. I hope you understand. I hope you forgive me. And I hope, whatever you decide, it brings you peace. Marcus closed the journal and sat in the dark kitchen, tears running down his face. Not for the money, not for the collection, but for a lonely old man who'd spent 50 years trying to matter, trying to leave something behind, trying to protect beautiful things in an ugly world. And now that burden, that gift, that impossible choice, it all belonged to Marcus. He looked at the clock. 3:47 a.m. In a few hours, Riley would wake up. He'd have to take her to school, go to work, pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Holland, this is Dr. Ellen Rodriguez from Northwestern University. Gerald Patterson provided your contact information. I'm a specialist in historical authentication and material culture studies. I understand you may have inherited a collection from Vincent Holland. I knew your uncle's work. We need to talk. Please call me as soon as possible. This is extremely important." Marcus stared at the message. How did she already know? He'd told no one except Patterson, and the lawyer was bound by confidentiality. A second message arrived, this one from a different number. "Marcus Holland, Apex Acquisitions LLC. We're prepared to make a substantial offer for any items your uncle may have left behind. Very substantial. Time sensitive. Call immediately." Then a third message, a fourth. By the time the sun came up, Marcus had received 7 messages from collectors, dealers, auction houses, and people who wouldn't identify themselves at all. The secret was out. Somehow, impossibly, people knew. Marcus called Patterson as soon as the office opened. "How do they know?" Marcus demanded. "I haven't told anyone. Riley hasn't told anyone. How the hell does half the antiquities world know about the collection?" Patterson sighed. "Your uncle had contacts in the collector community. He died 2 weeks ago. In that world, news travels fast. When people heard Vincent Holland had passed, they started asking questions about his collection. Everyone knew he had something. They just didn't know where or how much. You could have warned me. I didn't think they'd find you this quickly. But Marcus, listen to me carefully. Some of these people are legitimate professionals. Others are not. You need expert help, and you need it now. Do not let anyone into that factory. Do not discuss the collection. And for God's sake, do not accept any offers until you understand what you actually have." "I know what I have." Vincent kept detailed records. Vincent's records might be accurate or they might be conservative estimates, or, and I say this gently, some items might not be authentic. You need professional authentication. You need security. You need legal counsel specializing in estate sales and cultural property. This is beyond my expertise. Marcus ran his hand through his hair. "I can't afford experts. I can barely afford groceries. The collection itself has value that can secure loans or advances. But you need to move carefully. There are people who would take advantage of your situation. People who would offer you a fraction of the true value, and others who might try to claim items belong to them or were stolen or have unclear provenance." "Are you trying to scare me?" "I'm trying to protect you. Your uncle built something extraordinary. Don't let sharks destroy it before you understand what you have." After Riley left for school, Marcus called the one number that felt legitimate. Dr. Ellen Rodriguez answered on the first ring. "Mr. Holland, thank you for calling back. I apologize for the abruptness of my message, but time is critical. How much do you know about your uncle's collection?" "I've seen the vault. I've read some of his journals. I know it's valuable." Valuable is an understatement. Your uncle was one of the most significant private collectors in the country. He was also extraordinarily secretive. I've been trying to see his collection for 15 years. He always refused. Why did you want to see it? Because Vincent Holland had something no museum in America possesses. A comprehensive, authenticated collection documenting material culture evolution from 1750 through 2000. If his records are accurate, and I have every reason to believe they are, you have items that exist nowhere else. Marcus sat down hard. How do you know his records are accurate if you've never seen the collection? Because I've seen his research. Your uncle published under a pseudonym in academic journals. I didn't know it was him until 3 years ago, but his scholarship was impeccable. He knew what he was doing, Mr. Holland. The question is, do you know what you're doing? No, Marcus admitted. I have no idea what I'm doing. Then let me help you. I can authenticate the collection, provide proper valuations, connect you with museums and institutions. I can also protect you from people who will try to exploit your ignorance." "What's in it for you?" Ellen laughed. "Academic glory mostly. If I can publish research on the Holland collection, my career is made. But more than that, I believe in what your uncle did. History matters. Preservation matters. And I don't want to see 50 years of work destroyed by a quick auction to the highest bidder." Marcus thought about Vincent's final journal entry, about the choice between money and meaning. "Can you come to the factory today?" Marcus asked. "I can be there in 3 hours." Ellen Rodriguez arrived in a sensible sedan with Illinois plates, carrying 2 large equipment cases and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. She was in her 70s, Marcus guessed, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Holland," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "thank you for trusting me." "Call me Marcus, and I'm not sure I trust anyone right now." "Smart. Don't." She looked up at the factory. "Is this where he lived?" "Third-floor apartment. The collection is 3 levels below." Ellen's eyes widened. Underground? Climate-controlled? Museum quality according to the specs. "Of course it is. Vincent wouldn't do anything halfway." She picked up her cases. "Shall we?" Leading Ellen through the factory felt surreal. She moved quickly, efficiently, asking questions about security, access points, who else knew about the vault. When they reached the 3rd sub-level and Marcus opened the sealed door, Ellen stopped in the threshold exactly as he had, just staring. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's real. It's all real." She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the display cases with the intensity of a predator spotting prey. She moved to the nearest case, the vintage watches, and pulled out a pair of white gloves and a jeweler's loupe. "May I open this?" Marcus nodded. The case opened with a soft hiss. Ellen lifted the Patek Philippe minute repeater with trembling hands, examining every detail. Minutes passed in silence. Finally, she set it down gently and turned to Marcus. "This is authentic, museum quality, worth at least $800,000 on its own. That's what Vincent's notes said." "Show me the notes." Marcus handed her the journals. Ellen sat at Vincent's desk and began reading, occasionally cross-referencing entries with items in the collection. She worked for hours, taking photographs, making notes, examining item after item with meticulous care. Marcus brought her sandwiches from a nearby deli. She barely noticed, completely absorbed. Finally, as afternoon light began filtering down through the factory's high windows, Ellen looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they shone with something like reverence. "Marcus, do you understand what you have here? A lot of old stuff worth a lot of money?" Ellen laughed, a slightly manic sound. "This isn't old stuff. This is one of the most comprehensive private collections of American historical material culture I've ever encountered. Your uncle didn't collect randomly. He focused on objects that document technological evolution, social change, and cultural milestones. Every piece tells part of a larger story." She stood and gestured around the room. "These vintage computers document the birth of the digital age. Those musical instruments represent the evolution of American music. The photographs and documents are primary source material for events that shaped the country, and he preserved everything with museum-quality care. So Vincent's estimates are accurate, 247 million? Conservative, actually. If you sold everything at auction tomorrow, I'd estimate closer to 300 million. But Marcus, the historical value is incalculable. Some of these items exist nowhere else. Your uncle preserved pieces of our collective memory that would have been lost forever." Marcus sat down heavily. "What am I supposed to do with it?" Ellen sat across from him. "That depends. What do you want to do?" "I want to not screw this up. I want to honor Vincent's work. And, honestly, I want to make sure my daughter is taken care of. We've been barely getting by. This collection could do all of that, But you need to be careful. You need security, legal protection, and a plan. I don't know where to start. Ellen pulled out her phone. I know people, but before we bring anyone else in, I need to ask, have you considered keeping the collection intact? Marcus blinked. Why would I do that? Because your uncle spent 50 years building something meaningful that has value beyond money. Museums would fight for the chance to house this. Universities would send researchers. Students could learn from it. You could establish a legacy that lasts generations. I'm a mechanic. I don't know anything about museums. You hire people who do. You create a foundation, establish a board, bring in experts. Your role would be as steward, not operator. Marcus thought about Riley, about the apartment, about working 60-hour weeks. That sounds noble, but we need the money. Private museums generate revenue. If structured correctly, this collection could fund itself while providing you with guaranteed income for life. You wouldn't get $300 million in your bank account, but you'd have financial security forever. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. We know what you have. We're prepared to offer $50 million cash, today. No questions asked. Ellen saw his expression. What is it? Marcus showed her the message. Ellen's face hardened. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Someone's trying to pressure you into a quick sale at a fraction of the value. Don't respond. Another message arrived, then another. By the time they left the factory that evening, Marcus had received 23 messages, 12 voicemails, and 3 emails, all offering money, all claiming urgency, all trying to pressure him into immediate decisions. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the factory to find a man waiting outside. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of practiced concern. Mr. Holland? Bradley Morrison, Morrison Fine Arts and Antiquities. I've been trying to reach you. I got your messages. Then you know I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. $75 million for the entire collection, as is. We can close in a week. Marcus crossed his arms. The collection is worth more than that. Morrison smiled. Perhaps, but provenance can be complicated. Authentication is expensive. Legal challenges can arise. My offer includes assuming all risk. You walk away with $75 million free and clear. No complications. No. Morrison's smile tightened. Mr. Holland, be reasonable. You're a mechanic, not a curator. You have no idea how to handle something like this. Let professionals manage it. I said no. I'd hate to see you make a mistake that costs you everything. There was something in Morrison's tone that made Marcus's skin crawl. Not quite a threat, but not quite friendly either. You need to leave, Marcus said quietly. Morrison pulled out a business card. When you're ready to be smart about this, call me, but my offer expires in 72 hours. He walked to a black Mercedes and drove away. Marcus watched him go, his heart pounding. His phone rang. Ellen. Marcus, don't go to the factory alone anymore. I'm hearing things. People are getting aggressive. A guy was just here offering $75 million. Morrison, I've heard of him. He's connected to private collectors who don't always acquire items legally. If he's interested, that means word has spread to people with serious resources. What do? We accelerate. I'm bringing in a security consultant today, and we need to start documenting everything before someone tries to claim items or question authenticity. Can you meet me there in an hour? Yeah. And Marcus, from this point on, trust no one who contacts you directly. Everyone wants a piece of this. Over the next week, Marcus's life became a whirlwind of experts, consultants, and people who claimed they could help. Ellen brought in a museum consultant, a non-profit attorney, a security specialist, and an insurance broker. They photographed every item, cross-referenced Vincent's documentation, and began the painstaking process of authentication. The news got worse before it got better. 3 items in the collection had disputed provenance. A Civil War document was claimed by a historical society in Virginia who said it had been stolen in 1978. A vintage photograph was allegedly taken from a private estate without permission, and one of the computers had serial numbers that matched a university inventory from 1985. "Are they right?" Marcus asked Ellen. "Did Vincent steal these things?" Ellen studied the documentation carefully. "I don't think so. But your uncle acquired items from other collectors who might not have been entirely honest about their sources. This is the risk with private collecting. Sometimes provenance gets murky." "What happens now?" "We address each claim individually, provide our documentation, negotiate if necessary. It's going to be complicated." Then the break-in happened. Marcus got the call at 2 a.m. from the security company. Motion detected in the factory. Police dispatched. He arrived to find 3 squad cars, their lights painting the brick walls red and blue. Officer Dennison met him at the door. "We caught 2 suspects trying to break into something in the basement. They had serious equipment, bolt cutters, power drills, thermal lance." Marcus's blood ran cold. "Did they get in?" "No. Your new security system stopped them cold. But Marcus, they knew exactly where to go. This wasn't random." The suspects refused to talk, lawyered up immediately, and were gone within 48 hours on bail posted by an anonymous benefactor. Marcus sat in his truck outside the factory, watching the sun rise. Riley was at his sister's house, safe for now. But how long before someone figured out where they lived? How long before the people who wanted the collection decided to apply pressure directly? His phone rang. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Mr. Holland, you don't know me." The voice was cultured, calm, dangerous. "But I know about your uncle's collection. Specifically, I know about 3 items that belong to me. Items your uncle acquired through less than legal means." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I'm prepared to pay fair market value for their return, or we can handle this another way. You have 48 hours to decide." The line went dead. Marcus called Ellen, his hands shaking. "Someone just threatened me, said Vincent stole from them." "Did they specify which items?" "No." "Then they're bluffing, trying to scare you into giving them something valuable. Don't engage. I'm calling the police and our attorney." But the calls kept coming. The threats got more specific, more personal. Someone mentioned Riley by name, mentioned her school, mentioned that she walked 3 blocks to the bus stop every morning. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. The journals were spread in front of him, Vincent's life's work reduced to potential danger for Marcus's daughter. He opened the most recent journal to Vincent's final entry. "I want to give Marcus a choice I never had." Some choice, Marcus thought bitterly. Keep the collection and risk everything, or sell it to the highest bidder and live with knowing he'd destroyed 50 years of careful preservation for a quick payday. His phone buzzed. Another message, but this one was different. "Mr. Holland, this is James Chen from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I understand you're facing pressure from various parties regarding your uncle's collection. We'd like to help. No strings attached. We believe what your uncle built is worth protecting, and we have resources to assist with security, authentication, and legal challenges. Please call me." Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Then he looked at the photograph of Vincent in the vault, surrounded by his life's work, looking small and alone. "What would you want me to do?" Marcus whispered to the empty apartment, but he already knew the answer. Vincent had spent 50 years protecting these things because he believed they mattered more than money, more than comfort, more than safety. The question was whether Marcus had the courage to believe the same thing. Marcus Holland stood in the vault at 3 a.m., surrounded by $300 million worth of history he couldn't protect, staring at a decision that would define the rest of his life. The climate control hummed softly. Display cases glowed with their LED lights, and somewhere 3 floors above, the city slept, unaware that in this underground room a mechanic was trying to figure out if he had the courage to be something more. His phone sat on Vincent's desk, silent now after hours of threatening calls, urgent offers, and messages that ranged from genuine help to thinly veiled intimidation. Riley was safe at his sister's house in another town, but that was temporary. Eventually, she'd have to come home. Eventually, they'd have to face whatever came next. Marcus picked up Vincent's final journal, reading the last entry for the 100th time. "I want to give Marcus a choice I never had." "Some choice," Marcus muttered. "Keep it and risk everything, or sell it and lose my soul." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. Vincent hadn't trapped him. Vincent had freed him. For the first time in 3 years, since Sarah died, since the world became nothing but survival, Marcus had the resources to choose purpose over paycheck. The question was whether he had the guts to actually do it. He thought about Riley, about her pressing her face against the display cases, asking questions about history with the boundless curiosity of an 8-year-old, about her telling her friends that her great-uncle had saved important things because someone needed to, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the treasure room. She didn't see dollar signs. She saw stories. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Ellen Rodriguez. She answered on the second ring, sounding wide awake despite the hour. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually. I've made a decision." Ellen was quiet for a moment. "I'm listening. I'm keeping the collection. All of it. I want to do what Vincent would have wanted. Protect it, preserve it, and find a way to share it. I don't know how yet, but I'm not selling to some private collector who'll lock it away forever, and I'm definitely not selling to people who threaten my daughter." He heard Ellen exhale, a sound that might have been relief or excitement or both. "That's a brave choice, Marcus. It's also going to be incredibly difficult." "I know, that's why I need help. Real help. The National Trust guy said they could assist with security and legal issues. Is he legitimate?" "James Chen? Absolutely. The Trust is one of the most respected preservation organizations in the country. If they're offering help, take it." "What about funding? I can't afford to restore this factory or run a museum." That's where it gets interesting. The factory itself is a historic building. There are grants for preservation. The collection could secure loans or attract donors. And if we structure this right, we could create a foundation that funds itself through admissions, events, and educational programs. Marcus walked through the vault, looking at the cases. How long would all this take? 2 to 3 years before a public opening, maybe longer. It's not a quick process. And in the meantime, how do I keep Riley safe? How do I pay rent? How do I survive? The foundation can employ you from day one. Salary, benefits, the whole package. You'd be working full-time on the project. Restoration, cataloging, planning. It's not charity, Marcus. It's a real job that needs doing. Marcus stopped in front of a display case holding Civil War correspondence. Letters written by soldiers to their families. Words from men who knew they might die, trying to tell the people they loved that their lives had meant something. Someone needed to protect these stories. Someone needed to make sure they weren't forgotten. "Okay," Marcus said quietly. "Let's do it. Let's build something that lasts." The next morning, Marcus met with James Chen from the National Trust in a coffee shop downtown. Chen was younger than Marcus expected, mid-30s, sharp-dressed, with the kind of confident competence that came from actually knowing what you were doing. "Mr. Holland, thank you for meeting with me. I've read Vincent's documentation. What he built is extraordinary." "Call me Marcus, and I need to know, what's in this for you, for the Trust?" Chen smiled. "Honest answer, preservation is our mission. When we heard about the Holland collection, we knew it needed protection. Your uncle documented 5 decades of American material culture. That has educational value beyond measure. As for what's in it for us, visibility, partnerships with a significant institution, and the satisfaction of preventing priceless historical items from disappearing into private hands. I'm keeping it intact, opening it to the public. Chen's eyes lit up. That's the best possible outcome. We can help make it happen. Security assessment, legal framework, grant applications, partnership development. We have experts for all of it. I need security now. People have made threats. One guy specifically mentioned my daughter. Chen's expression hardened. We'll handle that today. I'll have a team at the factory by this afternoon. Former Secret Service, ex-military, people who know what they're doing. Nobody gets near that collection or your family without authorization. I can't afford. The trust has an emergency preservation fund for situations exactly like this. Consider it an investment in the project. We'll sort out reimbursement once the foundation is established and generating revenue. Marcus felt something unfamiliar unwind in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the relief of not being alone anymore. What's the next step? Chen pulled out a tablet. We create a non-profit foundation, the Holland Collection Foundation. You're the founder and chairman of the board. We bring in experts as board members. Ellen Rodriguez as chief curator, a museum director, a fundraising specialist, an education director. We hire staff, we restore the factory, we document everything, and in 2 to 3 years we open the doors. That's a long time. Building something worth keeping always is. That afternoon, security arrived at the factory. 6 professionals in plain clothes, carrying equipment that made Marcus's cheap alarm system look like a child's toy. They swept the building, identified vulnerabilities, and within hours had installed a security network that could detect a mouse in the basement. Nobody's getting in here, the team leader assured Marcus, and we're setting up security for your apartment and your daughter's school. Nothing obvious, nothing that will scare her. But anyone who tries to approach either of you will have a very bad day. Marcus wanted to argue about the cost, about the necessity, about taking help he couldn't repay. But then he thought about Riley walking to the bus stop, unaware that someone had threatened her, and he swallowed his pride. Thank you, was all he said. Word spread through the collector community that Marcus had declined all offers. The response was immediate and divided. Some respected his decision. Others were furious. Bradley Morrison, the dealer who'd offered $75 million, showed up at the factory the next day. Security stopped him at the gate. I need to speak with Mr. Holland, Morrison demanded. Mr. Holland isn't taking visitors, the guard replied politely. Tell him he's making a massive mistake. That collection could have been handled professionally. Now he's going to waste years of his life and millions of dollars on a vanity project that will fail. I'll make sure he gets the message. Morrison's face flushed red. You tell him that I warned him. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. He stormed back to his Mercedes and peeled out of the parking lot. Inside the factory, Marcus watched on the security monitors and felt oddly calm. Let Morrison be angry. Let all of them be angry. This wasn't about them anymore. But not everyone was hostile. The next morning, Marcus found a note taped to the factory door. It was written in shaky handwriting on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. Mr. Holland. My name is Robert Henshaw. I'm 92 years old. I heard about your uncle's collection, that you're keeping it to share with people. My father's bronze star is in there. I saw his name on a list someone shared online. He died in 1967. I thought that medal was lost forever. Thank you for protecting it. Thank you for letting our history matter. God bless you. Marcus folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. That was why he was doing this. Not for Morrison or the dealers or the collectors. For people like Robert Henshaw, who needed to know that the sacrifices of the people they loved weren't forgotten. The transformation began slowly, then picked up momentum like water finding its course. Ellen brought in graduate students from 3 universities to help catalog the collection. Every item needed photographing, documenting, researching. The students worked with the reverence of archaeologists uncovering a tomb, handling each piece with white gloves and infinite care. Marcus found himself learning alongside them. Ellen made him study authentication techniques, provenance research, conservation methods. "You're the founder," she said. "You need to understand what you're protecting." So Marcus studied. The mechanic who'd barely graduated high school spent his evenings reading academic papers on material culture, learning about the difference between patina and decay, understanding why context mattered as much as the object itself. Riley helped too. She came to the factory after school, doing homework at Vincent's old desk while adults catalogued treasures around her. She made friends with the graduate students who taught her to handle artifacts properly and explained why each piece mattered. "This typewriter," one student told her, "is from 1928. A writer named Jack Morrison used it to write a whole book about the Great Depression. We know because his granddaughter donated his papers, and they mentioned this exact machine." Riley ran her finger lightly along the typewriter's keys, not touching but hovering. "So someone made a story with this." "Exactly. And now that story has a story. That's what makes objects meaningful, the human lives attached to them." Marcus watched his daughter absorb this lesson and felt his decision solidify. This was education no school could provide. This was Riley learning that history wasn't dates in textbooks, but lives lived, choices made, objects touched by human hands. The factory itself needed massive work. The building inspector's report was 47 pages of violations, safety hazards, and code violations. But James Chen connected Marcus with contractors who specialized in historic preservation. "This building has good bones," the structural engineer said, walking through the main floor. "The original construction was first-rate. Most of what you need is cosmetic. New electrical, updated plumbing, climate control, safety systems. But the brick, the steel framework, the foundations, they're solid." "How much?" Marcus asked, bracing himself. "Full restoration, $4 to $5 million. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I don't have $4 million. "No, but the Holland Collection Foundation will. We're already working on grant applications, historic preservation funds, cultural institution grants, state economic development money. The building itself is a historic landmark. That opens doors." Over the next 6 months, Marcus watched the factory slowly transform. Construction crews removed decades of decay, revealing the building's original grandeur. Massive windows were replaced with UV filtering glass. Original brick walls were cleaned and restored. Wood floors were refinished to gleaming perfection. But not everyone was happy about the progress. The threats continued, evolved. Someone spray-painted "Sell Out" across the factory's front door. Marcus's truck tires were slashed twice. Anonymous letters arrived claiming various items in the collection were stolen, forged, or legally belonged to other people. The most disturbing incident came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus arrived at the factory to find security dealing with a man who'd climbed the fence during the night. He was in his 40s, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase. "I just want to see the collection," the man insisted. "I'm a legitimate collector. I have cash. I'll pay $10 million for just one item. Any item. Just let me see them." Security escorted him off the property, but his desperation was unsettling. What kind of obsession drove someone to break into a secured building just for the chance to buy something? "There's a whole world of private collectors out there," Ellen explained when Marcus asked her about it. "Some are respectable, others are obsessive. For them, ownership is everything. The idea that a significant collection is going to a public institution where common people can see items they think should be theirs, it drives them crazy. That's insane. That's collecting. For some people it becomes an addiction. They need to possess beautiful things, even if it means breaking the law." Marcus increased security, installed higher fences, added more cameras. The factory became a fortress. But inside those walls, something beautiful was being built. The local community began to take notice. At first, it was just curiosity. People drove by to see what was happening at the Old Holland factory. Then curiosity became interest. A reporter from the local newspaper asked for an interview. Marcus hesitated, not wanting publicity, but James Chen encouraged him. People need to know what you're building. Community support matters, and frankly, public attention is protective. The more people who know about the project, the harder it is for bad actors to interfere. The article ran on the front page. Local mechanic inherits fortune, chooses to share it. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived at the factory, hundreds of them. Some from people who'd worked at the Holland manufacturing facility back when it was operational, sharing memories of the building's glory days. Others from teachers asking if they could bring classes once the museum opened. Retirees offered to volunteer. Local businesses asked how they could help. "We want to donate to the Restoration Fund," said the owner of Hannigan's Hardware, a shop that had been in town for 60 years. "Not much, maybe $500, but this building, my grandfather worked here. It means something to see it come back to life." A local contractor who'd submitted a bid for electrical work called Marcus directly. "I'm cutting my price in half. This project matters more than profit. My dad lost his job when this place closed. Helped destroy this town. If you're bringing it back, I want to help." The high school shop teacher brought his entire class to tour the restoration work. 20 teenagers in safety helmets watched contractors reinforce steel beams and install climate control systems. "See this?" the teacher said. "This is skilled labor. This is craftsmanship. This is proof that working with your hands matters, that building things matters, that protecting history matters." Marcus stood off to the side, watching teenagers take notes and ask questions, and realized something profound. This wasn't just about the collection anymore. It was about showing a dying town that revival was possible, that beautiful things could rise from ruins, that one person's choice could create ripples that touched hundreds of lives. But the opposition didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. A lawyer representing a consortium of private collectors filed a lawsuit claiming that 3 items in the collection had been acquired illegally and should be returned to their rightful owners. The items in question were worth a combined $12 million. "They're testing us," the foundation's attorney explained. "Seeing if we'll settle, if we'll give in to pressure. We need to fight this." "How much will that cost?" "In legal fees? Potentially hundreds of thousands. But if we lose the items and our credibility. Other claims will follow." Marcus felt the weight of it pressing down. Every decision had cascading consequences. Every threat had to be taken seriously. And all of it fell on him, a mechanic who'd been barely scraping by 6 months ago. He sat in the vault that night, exhausted and scared, and pulled out his phone. He called Riley, who was at his sister's house again. "Hey baby, how was school?" "Good. We learned about the California gold rush." "Dad, did you know people traveled for months just for a chance to find gold, and most of them never found any?" "I did know that, yeah. But they went anyway. Because they believed in something, right? They believed it was worth trying." Marcus closed his eyes, his 8-year-old daughter unknowingly giving him exactly the perspective he needed. "Yeah, sweetheart, they believed it was worth trying." "Is the museum hard, Dad? Are you okay?" Marcus looked around at the display cases, at Vincent's life work, at the foundation he was building. "It's really hard, Riley, but it's worth it." "Good. I told Emma at school that my dad is building a museum for everyone. She said that's cooler than Disney World." Marcus laughed, felt tears on his cheeks. "I love you, baby girl." "Love you too, Dad. Don't give up, okay? Great Uncle Vincent didn't give up, and you're like him." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the silence of the vault and let himself feel everything: the fear, the exhaustion, the pressure, the doubt. And underneath all of it, something harder and brighter: determination. Vincent had done this alone for 50 years. Marcus had help, had a team, had a community rallying around him. He didn't have an excuse to quit. The lawsuit was settled out of court 3 months later. The Foundation's research team proved conclusively that all 3 items had been legally acquired, with documented provenance stretching back to their original owners. The consortium's lawyers withdrew their claim and paid the Foundation's legal fees. "First victory," James Chen said when he called with the news. "But it won't be the last fight. People are watching now, waiting to see if you'll succeed or fail." "Let them watch," Marcus replied. By the time Riley's 9th birthday rolled around, the factory was unrecognizable. The main floor had been converted into a stunning exhibition space: original brick walls cleaned and lit dramatically, polished wood floors, professional display cases being installed. The 2nd floor was being transformed into research facilities and a conservation lab. The 3rd floor apartment where Vincent had lived alone was now comfortable offices and a modest apartment where Marcus and Riley lived rent-free. And 3 levels below, the vault remained as Vincent had built it, expanded now with additional climate-controlled storage and research space. Riley wanted her birthday party at the factory. "Can we, Dad? Please? I want to show my friends what we're building." Marcus hesitated. The building was still a construction zone, but Ellen thought it was a wonderful idea. Let people see the progress, let the community feel invested, and honestly, a 9-year-old's birthday party here? That's exactly the kind of thing Vincent would have loved, all this history, celebrated with joy and cake. So Riley's 9th birthday party happened in an unfinished museum surrounded by construction equipment and carefully covered artifacts. 20 kids ran through the space on a scavenger hunt, learning about historical objects while eating cake and laughing. Local parents stayed to help supervise and ended up taking tours, asking questions, offering to volunteer. By the end of the party, Marcus had a list of 15 new community members who wanted to contribute to the project. As the party wound down and parents collected their children, Riley hugged Marcus tightly. "This was the best birthday ever, Dad." "Yeah? Great Uncle Vincent would have liked it, I think. All these people being happy in his house." Marcus held his daughter and looked around at the construction, the work, the potential. A year ago, he'd been barely surviving, patching Riley's shoes with duct tape, eating peanut butter sandwiches, and wondering if life would ever be more than struggle. Now he was building something that would outlast him. Something that mattered. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus said. "I think he would have." The months that followed were a blur of work, problem-solving, and steady progress. The construction was finished. Display cases were installed. The cataloging was complete. Every item had been photographed, researched, and documented. The Foundation had hired its first employees: a facilities manager, 2 security guards, and education coordinator. Ellen assembled a team of curators and researchers who would rotate through, studying the collection and developing exhibitions. The National Trust provided training for Marcus in nonprofit management, fundraising, and public relations. "You're not just the founder," James Chen told him. "You're the face of this institution. People need to see that a regular person, a mechanic, a father, can protect history. That's powerful." Marcus gave his first public speech to a gathering of potential donors. He was terrified, hands shaking as he stood behind the podium, looking out at faces that included millionaires, professors, and community leaders. "My name is Marcus Holland," he began. "A year ago, I was fixing cars and barely making rent. I inherited a collection I didn't understand from an uncle I barely knew. I could have sold everything for enough money to never work again. But I kept thinking about something my daughter said. She said these things tell stories, and stories matter." He looked at the faces watching him. "My Uncle Vincent spent 50 years collecting pieces of history because he believed someone needed to protect them. Now I believe it too. Not because I'm smart or educated or qualified, but because it's the right thing to do. And if a mechanic from a dying town can protect $300 million worth of history and share it with everyone, then maybe anything is possible. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, then another person, then everyone rising to their feet, applause filling the space. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks but didn't wipe them away. This was real, this was happening, and somehow, impossibly, it was working. 2 weeks before the planned grand opening, Marcus walked through the completed museum alone. Riley was asleep upstairs. The staff had gone home. The building was quiet, lit only by security lights and the soft glow of display cases. The transformation was complete. Where there had been decay, now there was beauty. Where there had been darkness, now there was light. The factory that had sat dying for 40 years was alive again, purposeful, meaningful. Marcus stopped in front of a new display Ellen had installed. Vincent's original toolbox from 1972, the one that held the first medals he'd ever purchased. A plaque beside it read, "Vincent Holland's journey began with a simple act of respect." In 1972, Vincent Holland paid $200 for World War I medals at an estate sale, wanting to honor men who had served. This single act of preservation grew into one of the most significant private collections in American history. For 50 years, Vincent protected these objects, believing that someone needed to remember. Today, his nephew continues that work, proving that preservation is not just an act of the past, but a gift to the future. Marcus ran his fingers along the edge of the display, feeling the weight of everything Vincent had given him. Not just wealth, not just objects, but purpose, direction, the chance to matter. His phone buzzed. A message from Ellen. "Tomorrow's walkthrough is at 8 a.m., press at 9. Staff meeting at 10, opening ceremony at noon. You ready for this?" Marcus looked around at the museum, at Vincent's life work transformed into something that would touch thousands of lives, at the legacy rebuilt through choice and courage. He texted back, "Ready." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He went down to the vault, now a pristine research facility, and sat at Vincent's old desk. He pulled out his uncle's final journal and read the last entry one more time. "I hope you understand. I hope you forgive me. And I hope, whatever you decide, it brings you peace." Marcus pulled out a pen and added his own entry below Vincent's. "I understand now. There's nothing to forgive. You gave me more than a collection. You gave me a purpose. Tomorrow we open the doors. Tomorrow your 50 years of work becomes a gift to everyone. I hope I did right by you. Thank you, Uncle Vincent, for trusting me, for believing I could be more than I thought I was. Your nephew, Marcus." He closed the journal and looked around the vault one final time as a private space. Tomorrow it would belong to the world. Tomorrow, scholars and students and curious minds would fill these rooms, learning from objects that Vincent had saved from obscurity. Tomorrow, a mechanic's choice would become a community's treasure. And somewhere, in whatever place lonely collectors go after they die, Marcus hoped Vincent was smiling. The morning of the grand opening, Marcus woke at dawn to find Riley already dressed and sitting on the edge of his bed. "Dad, it's today," she whispered, as if speaking too loud might break the spell. "Great Uncle Vincent's collection is finally going to meet the world." Marcus sat up, his heart already racing. In 6 hours the doors would open. Press would arrive, dignitaries would give speeches, and hundreds of people would walk through a factory that had sat abandoned for decades, now transformed into something that shouldn't exist but did, a museum built not by institutions or wealthy donors, but by a mechanic who'd chosen meaning over money. "Are you nervous?" Riley asked. Marcus pulled her into a hug. Terrified, but the good kind of terrified. By 7 a.m., the parking lot was already filling with news vans. Local stations had covered the restoration, but now national media was arriving. The story had captured something people needed. proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, that one choice could change everything, that beautiful things could rise from ruins. Ellen Rodriguez arrived looking surprisingly nervous for someone who'd worked with museum collections for 4 decades. She found Marcus standing in the main exhibition hall, staring at the displays that had consumed the last 18 months of his life. "You okay?" she asked. "I keep thinking Vincent should be here. This was his work, his life, and he died alone in this building, never knowing anyone would see it." Ellen squeezed his shoulder. "He knew. That's why he left it to you. He knew you'd do what he couldn't. Open the doors and let the world in." At 8:30, the staff gathered for a final walkthrough. 23 employees now worked at the Holland Collection Museum: security, curators, education coordinators, facilities management, administrative staff. 2 years ago, Marcus had been alone, barely surviving. Now he led a team dedicated to protecting history. "Today is going to be chaos," Marcus told them. "We're expecting over 500 people just for the opening ceremony, more throughout the day. Some will understand what they're seeing, others will need help. Either way, remember, we're not just showing them objects, we're showing them why preservation matters, why history matters, why one person's dedication can create something that lasts forever." The team dispersed to their positions. Riley stayed close to Marcus, wearing a new dress and carrying a clipboard like she was official staff. At 9 years old, she'd become the museum's unofficial junior ambassador, able to explain the collection's significance in language kids understood. "I'm going to tell people about the typewriter," Riley announced. "The one where the writer made a whole story, because that's my favorite." "That's perfect, baby." At 9 a.m., James Chen from the National Trust arrived with a film crew. "We're documenting this for our archives. 20 years from now, people will want to see how it all began." Marcus laughed nervously. "No pressure then. Marcus, you've already succeeded. The building is restored. The collection is authenticated. The foundation is solvent. Everything from here is victory." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something could still go wrong. That somehow, this dream he'd built could collapse at the last moment. Then Robert Henshaw arrived. The 92-year-old veteran who'd written that note about his father's Bronze Star came in a wheelchair, pushed by his grandson. When he saw Marcus, his weathered face broke into a trembling smile. "Mr. Holland, I had to be here. Had to see it with my own eyes." Marcus knelt beside the wheelchair. "I'm so glad you came. Would you like to see your father's medal?" Tears streamed down Robert's face as Marcus led them to the military collection display. There, in a climate-controlled case, sat Private First Class James Henshaw's Bronze Star, along with a photograph and documentation about his service in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. "I thought it was gone forever," Robert whispered. "After Mama sold it, I figured some rich collector had it locked away. But here it is, where anyone can see it, where my great-grandkids can see it and know what their great-great-grandfather did." He reached out with a shaking hand, not quite touching the glass, just hovering there as if feeling the connection across decades. "Your uncle was a good man, Mr. Holland, and so are you." Marcus had to step away, overcome with emotion. This was why Vincent had done it. Not for money or recognition, but for moments like this, when objects became bridges between past and present, when history stopped being abstract and became personal. At 10 a.m., the mayor arrived with the city council. The same town officials who'd written off the industrial district as dead, who'd seen the factory as an eyesore, now stood in a gleaming exhibition hall talking about economic revitalization and cultural heritage. "This project has already created 23 jobs," the mayor said, practicing his speech, "and we project it will bring over 50,000 visitors annually, generating millions in tourism revenue. The Holland Collection Museum isn't just preserving history, it's creating our future." Marcus bit his tongue. 6 months ago, those same officials had fought against tax breaks for the restoration. Now they wanted credit for the success. But James Chen had warned him about this. Take the high road, Chen had advised. Let them claim victory. What matters is the work, not who gets applause. By 11 a.m., the crowd outside was enormous. Local residents mixed with tourists who'd driven from neighboring states. School groups arrived in buses. News cameras captured it all. The line stretching around the block, the factory that had been reborn, the story that had captured the nation's attention. At exactly noon, Marcus stood at a podium outside the main entrance, looking at hundreds of faces. Riley stood beside him, holding his hand. Ellen was there, and James Chen, and the entire staff. Behind them, the restored factory rose 5 stories, its red brick cleaned and gleaming, its windows catching the sunlight like promises kept. Marcus's prepared speech was in his pocket, written by a professional hired by the foundation. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out, his own words, from his heart. My name is Marcus Holland. 18 months ago, I inherited an abandoned factory from an uncle I barely knew. I was working 60-hour weeks as a mechanic, barely making rent, patching my daughter's shoes with duct tape. When I found out what was hidden 3 floors below us, I had a choice. Sell everything and never work again, or honor my uncle's 50 years of dedication and share it with the world. He paused, looking at Riley. My daughter helped me choose. She said these things tell stories, and she was right. Every item in this museum has a story. The soldier who earned that medal, the writer who used that typewriter, the scientist who built that microscope. They all lived, worked, struggled, dreamed, and left pieces of themselves behind. His voice grew stronger. My Uncle Vincent spent half a century protecting these stories because he believed someone needed to remember. He lived alone, gave up family, sacrificed everything, not for profit, but for preservation. Today, we honor his work by opening these doors, by letting you see what he protected, by proving that history isn't something that happened to other people. It's the foundation we all stand on. He gestured to the building behind him. This factory once employed hundreds of people, then sat dying for 40 years. Now it's alive again. Not because of money or institutions or powerful people, but because one choice, to protect instead of profit, created ripples that touched hundreds of lives. That's the real legacy here. Not the value of what's inside, but the courage to believe some things matter more than money. The crowd was silent. Then, just like at the donor meeting, someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone, the applause building like thunder, people rising to their feet, cameras flashing, and Marcus standing at the center of it with tears streaming down his face and Riley's hand tight in his. We did it, Dad, Riley whispered. Great Uncle Vincent would be so proud. The doors opened and the world poured in. The response exceeded every projection. 523 people toured the museum on opening day. They moved through the exhibition halls in awed silence, pausing at displays, reading documentation, asking questions that the staff answered with enthusiasm. A middle-aged woman stood crying in front of the vintage typewriter collection, explaining to her teenage daughter that her grandfather had been a writer who'd used a similar machine. I wish I'd saved his typewriter, she said. I threw it away after he died, thought it was junk, but it was part of his story. A group of high school students crowded around the early computer display, amazed that machines the size of entire rooms had less power than their phones. This is what my grandpa used to talk about, one said. He said he programmed computers with punch cards. I didn't even know what that meant until now. Veterans gravitated to the military collection, sharing stories with each other and with strangers who stopped to listen. An 80-year-old former Navy pilot pointed to navigation equipment and explained how it worked to a fascinated group of kids. We used these to find our way home, he said softly. No GPS, no satellites, just math and stars and prayer. Marcus moved through the crowds, listening to conversations, watching connections form. This was what Vincent had understood but couldn't quite achieve, that preservation was only half the work. Sharing was the other half. Objects locked away were just things. Objects shared became teachers. The press coverage was overwhelming. The story went national. Mechanic turns down fortune to save history. It spread on social media, news sites, and morning shows. Marcus received interview requests from dozens of outlets. Ellen advised him to be selective. Control the narrative. Make sure they understand this isn't about you getting rich. It's about choosing purpose. Marcus did one major interview with a national network, sitting in the vault where it all began, explaining his decision in his own words. "People keep asking if I regret not selling," Marcus said to the camera. "The answer is no. Money would have solved my immediate problems. But this," he gestured at the displays around him, "this solves something deeper. It gives my daughter a father who stands for something. It gives my town hope. It proves that ordinary people can protect extraordinary things. That's worth more than any amount in a bank account." The interview aired on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, the museum had received over 300 emails from people thanking Marcus, sharing their own stories, asking how they could help. One letter came from a woman in Oregon who'd been about to sell her grandmother's vintage jewelry to pay bills. "I watched your story and realized those pieces are part of my grandmother's life." Her story. "I'm keeping them now, preserving them for my own kids. You reminded me that some things shouldn't be measured in dollars." Another came from a teacher in Mississippi. "I showed your interview to my students. Most of them come from families struggling financially. They needed to see that success isn't just about getting rich. It's about doing something that matters. Thank you for showing them another way." The letters kept coming, hundreds, then thousands. Marcus couldn't read them all, but Riley helped, organizing them into categories. "These are from kids," she said, creating a pile. "These are from veterans. These are from teachers. And these are from people who just needed hope." One night, Riley climbed into Marcus's lap while he was working in his office, something she hadn't done in months. She was getting older, more independent, but sometimes she still needed her dad. "Dad, are you happy now?" Marcus set down his pen. "What do you mean?" "Before we found the vault, you were always worried, always tired. Now you're still tired, but you smile more. Are you happy?" Marcus held his daughter close, smelling her shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "Yeah, baby, I am. Not because we have a museum or because people know our story, but because I'm doing something that matters. And because you're old enough to understand why it matters." "I'm glad we didn't sell," Riley said. "I think Great-Uncle Vincent knew you wouldn't. That's why he gave it to you instead of someone else." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "You might be right." The impact on the town was immediate and tangible. Within 3 months of opening, new businesses appeared near the museum: a coffee shop, a bookstore, a gift shop specializing in historical reproductions. The empty storefronts that had defined the industrial district for decades suddenly had tenants again. Local restaurants that had been barely surviving reported increased business. "We get museum visitors every day now," said the owner of Angelo's Diner. "People who come for the collection, stay for lunch, and tell us they're amazed our town has something this significant." The economic study commissioned by the city showed the museum had generated $2.3 million in economic activity in its first 3 months, creating 47 jobs directly and indirectly. Property values in the surrounding neighborhood increased by 18%. But the numbers didn't capture the real change. The town felt different, alive again, hopeful. People who'd been resigned to decline suddenly saw possibility. If a factory could be reborn, if history could become relevant again, if one man's choice could create such ripples, what else was possible? The high school started an apprenticeship program where students worked at the museum part-time, learning conservation, curation, and museum management. Riley's teacher brought her entire class for a special tour, and afterward, 7 kids asked Marcus how they could work there when they got older. "You showed them that our town matters," the teacher told Marcus. "That we have something worth protecting and sharing. That's a lesson no textbook could teach." 6 months after opening, the museum held its first traveling exhibition. A collection of Civil War correspondence went on loan to 3 other museums, with documentation explaining how the Holland collection had preserved materials that would have been lost otherwise. "This is how influence spreads," Ellen explained. "Other institutions see your work, understand your mission, and want to participate. You're not just preserving history, you're inspiring others to do the same." Marcus attended the opening of one such exhibition in Chicago. The museum director, a distinguished scholar who'd spent 40 years in the field, shook his hand warmly. "What you've done is remarkable, Mr. Holland. Most private collections end up scattered at auction or locked away in private hands. You chose a different path. You've set an example that others will follow. I just did what felt right. That's why it worked. You weren't motivated by ego or profit. You were motivated by belief. That's rare in this field." As the months passed, Marcus fell into a rhythm. He worked at the museum 50 hours a week, but it didn't feel like work the way fixing cars had felt like work. This was purposeful. This was building something that would outlast him. Riley thrived. She joined the museum's junior docent program, learning to give tours to visitors her own age. She studied the collection with the intensity of a scholar, memorizing stories, understanding context, able to explain significance in ways that made other kids lean in and listen. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus watched Riley lead a group of 10-year-olds through the musical instrument collection. She stood in front of a vintage guitar, her confidence remarkable for a 9-year-old. "This guitar was made in 1872, Riley explained. A man named Thomas Beaumont built it by hand in Nashville. He taught himself how because his family couldn't afford to buy one. And with this guitar, he played at churches and town halls, bringing music to people who had nothing. After he died, his grandson donated it so everyone could see what his grandfather made." The kids asked questions. Riley answered them all, patient and knowledgeable. When the tour ended, the parents thanked her, and one mother pulled Marcus aside. "Your daughter is extraordinary. You should be very proud." "I am," Marcus said, his voice thick, "every single day." That evening, as they walked home, the apartment was just across the parking lot now, Riley asked, "Dad, do you think I could work here forever? Like when I grow up?" "You could, but you could do anything you want. You're smart enough for any career." "But this is important. Protecting stories. Making sure people remember. If I worked here, I'd be doing something that matters. Like you. Like Great Uncle Vincent." Marcus stopped walking and knelt in front of his daughter. "Riley, the most important thing isn't what job you have. It's that you choose something that means something to you. Great Uncle Vincent spent 50 years doing work that no one saw, and it still mattered because he believed in it. If you want to work here, that's wonderful. But promise me you'll always choose meaning over money, purpose over profit. That's the real legacy." Riley hugged him tight. "I promise, Dad." A year after opening, the museum hosted its first major symposium. Scholars from 12 universities gathered to discuss the Holland collection's significance and implications for private preservation efforts. Marcus sat in the back, listening to academics debate authentication methodology and cultural property ethics, feeling completely out of his depth. During a break, a professor from Yale approached him. "Mr. Holland, I must say, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. Do you have formal training in museum studies?" "I'm a mechanic," Marcus replied. "Or I was. Now I guess I'm a museum director who doesn't really know what he's doing." The professor laughed. "Yet you've created one of the most talked-about institutions in the country. Sometimes formal training teaches us what's possible. Your ignorance of those limitations let you imagine something new. That evening, Ellen found Marcus alone in the vault, the place where everything had started. "You okay?" she asked. "Just thinking. Listening to all those professors talk about provenance and cultural property law and preservation ethics. I don't understand half of it. I'm a fraud, Ellen. I'm pretending to be something I'm not." Ellen sat beside him. "You're not a fraud. You're exactly what this project needed. Someone who cared about meaning more than credentials. Yes, you had help. Yes, experts guided you. But you made the hard choices. You stood up to pressure. You chose preservation over profit. No degree can teach that. Vincent would have been better at this." "Vincent locked himself away for 50 years. You opened the doors. You shared what he built. That took a different kind of courage." Marcus looked around the vault at the displays that now hosted researchers from around the world. "Do you think he'd be happy with what we did?" Ellen smiled. "I think he's thrilled. You gave his life's work a purpose he could never achieve alone. You made his 50 years of solitude meaningful by ending the solitude." 2 years after opening, the museum was featured in a documentary about American preservation efforts. Cameras followed Marcus through his daily routine, captured Riley giving tours, and interviewed community members about the project's impact. The documentary's final scene showed Marcus standing in front of Vincent's original toolbox display, the one holding the first medals his uncle had ever purchased. "People ask me what the most valuable item in the collection is," Marcus said to the camera. "And the honest answer? It's not about monetary value. The most valuable item is this toolbox, because it represents the moment Vincent Holland decided that preservation mattered more than profit. That decision, repeated thousands of times over 50 years, created everything you see here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We live in a world that teaches us to measure everything in dollars. Your worth is your salary. Success is your bank account. But Vincent showed me something different. He showed me that what you protect, what you preserve, what you stand for, that's your real wealth. And that's a lesson worth more than any collection, no matter how valuable." The documentary won awards, aired nationally, and brought even more visitors to the museum. But more importantly, it started conversations. About what we value, about what we preserve, about what we're willing to sacrifice for meaning instead of money. Marcus received letters from people who'd made similar choices, turned down higher-paying jobs to teach, stayed in struggling towns to help them revive, chose family over fortune. "Your story gave me permission to not feel stupid for my choice," one letter read. "Thank you for showing that purpose has value even when it doesn't show up in a paycheck." On the second anniversary of the museum's opening, Riley turned 11. They held a quiet celebration in the vault. Just Marcus, Riley, Ellen, James Chen, and a few staff members who'd become family. "Make a wish," Marcus said as Riley leaned over her cake, candles flickering. Riley closed her eyes, was silent for a moment, then blew out the candles in one breath. When Marcus asked what she'd wished for, she shook her head. "Can't tell or it won't come true, but it was about great-uncle Vincent, about making sure he knows we're taking care of his stuff." Later, after everyone had gone home, Marcus and Riley sat together on the floor of the vault, their backs against Vincent's desk. "Dad, do you ever miss the old life, before we found all this?" Marcus thought about the question seriously. "I miss how simple it was. Wake up, work, come home, repeat. No pressure, no responsibility, no one counting on me except you. But I don't miss feeling like I was just surviving, like my life was just a series of days to get through. Now I feel like I'm building something, like my life means something beyond just existing." Riley leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you chose to keep it. I know it's been hard, but I'm proud of you, Dad." Marcus wrapped his arm around his daughter, This girl who'd grown so much in 2 years, who'd gone from a shy 8-year-old to a confident almost 11-year-old who gave museum tours and understood that history mattered. "I'm proud of us," Marcus said. "We did this together." The museum continued to grow. Year 3 brought international visitors. Year 4 brought a major grant to expand educational programming. Year 5 brought a second building, a research center where scholars could study the collection in depth. The town continued its revival. New businesses opened. Population increased for the first time in 30 years. The school district, once on the verge of consolidation, added programs and teachers. The industrial district, written off as dead, became a historic preservation area with walking tours and new development. And through it all, Marcus showed up every day, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because protecting Vincent's legacy had become his own legacy. Because the work mattered. 10 years after inheriting the factory, Marcus stood in that same spot where he'd first discovered the vault. The space had changed, expanded, modernized, made accessible to researchers from around the world. But the core remained the same. Vincent's careful documentation, his meticulous preservation, his belief that history deserved protection. Riley was 19 now, studying museum studies at Northwestern, interning at the Smithsonian, but planning to return home after graduation to work at the Holland collection permanently. "It's where I belong," she'd told Marcus. "It's where our story is." Ellen was semi-retired but still served as chief curator emeritus, training the next generation of preservationists. James Chen had moved on to other projects but visited regularly, always marveling at what they'd built. The museum had welcomed its millionth visitor the previous month. 1 million people who'd walked through doors that almost stayed closed, who'd seen treasures that almost ended up scattered to private collectors, who'd connected with history because one mechanic had chosen meaning over money. Marcus pulled out Vincent's journal, the one he'd added his own entry to years ago. He flipped past his words to a blank page and began writing again. 10 years ago, I inherited something I didn't understand from a man I barely knew. I thought the treasure was in the vault, the objects, the value, the impossible wealth. But I was wrong. The real treasure was the choice. The courage to believe that some things matter more than money. The determination to protect instead of profit. The faith that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they're brave enough to try. Vincent gave me a collection worth hundreds of millions. But what he really gave me was purpose. He showed me that one person's dedication can create ripples that touch thousands of lives. That working with your hands can mean more than any office job. That being a good father means showing your daughter that character matters more than comfort. I'm not a scholar. I'm not an expert. I'm still just a mechanic who got lucky. But I learned something these past 10 years. The most valuable things we build aren't made of brick and steel. They're made of choices, and the legacy that lasts isn't what we accumulate. It's what we protect for those who come after us. Thank you, Vincent, for trusting me with your life's work. I hope I've honored it. I hope you're proud. And I hope, wherever you are, you know that your 50 years alone weren't wasted. They were the foundation for something beautiful. Your nephew, Marcus! He closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf. Part of the archive now, part of the story that future generations would study. His phone buzzed. A text from Riley. "Dad, I'm coming home this weekend. Want to help plan the new exhibition on early American craftsmanship?" Marcus smiled and texted back, "Always." He walked through the vault one last time that evening, turning off lights, checking security systems, making sure everything was protected for another night. This ritual had become meditation, the quiet confirmation that he was keeping Vincent's faith, honoring the work, standing guard over stories that deserved to be remembered. As he climbed the stairs back to the world above, Marcus thought about the morning he'd received Patterson's call about the inheritance. How terrified he'd been, how desperate, how certain that life would never be more than survival. He thought about the moment he'd opened the vault and seen $300 million worth of history, and the choice that had followed. Sell or save. profit or preserve, easy money or hard meaning. He thought about Riley, growing up watching her father choose principle over profit, learning that success isn't measured in bank accounts but in lives touched, stories preserved, legacies honored. And he thought about Vincent, alone in this building for decades, protecting beautiful things from a world that didn't understand their value, believing someone would someday care enough to share them. Marcus had been that someone. A mechanic with grease under his nails, struggling to pay rent, patching his daughter's shoes, barely surviving. But when faced with the most important choice of his life, he'd chosen right. The factory no longer looked abandoned. Lights illuminated its restored brick walls. The parking lot was full even in the evening, researchers working late, staff preparing tomorrow's programs. Through the windows, Marcus could see display cases glowing softly, treasures preserved for another generation to discover. He walked across the lot to his apartment, no longer cramped and cold, but comfortable and warm. Riley's acceptance letter to Northwestern was framed on the wall. Photographs showed their journey, opening day, Riley's first tour, the millionth visitor, all the moments that mattered. And on his desk, in a simple frame, was the letter Vincent had left him. I want to give Marcus a choice I never had. Marcus stood looking at that letter for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and typed an email to the Foundation's education director. I'd like to start a scholarship program for kids from struggling families who want to study preservation, history, or museum work. Kids who might not see themselves in those fields because they're mechanics' kids or factory workers' kids or just kids who think college isn't for people like them. Let's call it the Vincent Holland Scholarship. Let's make sure the next generation knows that where you start doesn't determine where you end up. He sent the email and felt something settle in his chest. Not relief exactly, more like rightness. Like one more piece falling into place in the puzzle he'd been building for 10 years. Anyone can inherit wealth, Marcus thought. But it takes courage to inherit responsibility. It takes faith to believe that meaning matters more than money. And it takes love for history, for community, for family, to protect something not because it's profitable, but because it's right. That night, Marcus fell asleep easily for the first time in years, no longer worried about bills or threats or whether he was doing enough. He'd built something that would outlast him. He'd honored Vincent's sacrifice. He'd shown Riley that character mattered more than comfort. The real treasure had never been in the vault. It had been in the choice to open it and share what was inside. In the courage to stand up to pressure and believe that ordinary people could protect extraordinary things, in the faith that one decision could create ripples touching thousands of lives. Marcus Holland had inherited an abandoned factory and a secret collection worth a fortune. But what he built was worth far more. A legacy of preservation, a community revived, a daughter who understood that success isn't about what you accumulate but what you protect for those who come after. The factory that had once been a monument to decay was now a beacon of hope. The collection that had been hidden for 50 years now taught thousands of students annually. The town that had been dying now thrived with new purpose and pride. And the mechanic who'd barely been surviving had become a man who knew with absolute certainty that he'd chosen right. Because in the end, the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lives touched, stories preserved, and legacies that last long after we're gone. Vincent Holland had understood that. And now, so did Marcus. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering what happens when ordinary people make extraordinary choices. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the real treasure isn't what we find, it's what we choose to do with it.